Hey guys, so this is my vintage Pfaff 130. This is actually my personal machine, but I've restored several of these machines. And a really common issue that I've seen, at least with all of the ones that I've restored, and it seems like a lot of the ones that are out there, is frozen stitch width knobs on these machines. Either the knob's frozen onto the shaft, or the shaft itself is frozen so you can't adjust the stitch width. So I've had some pretty good success with freeing these up, so I thought I would share that with everybody else, and hopefully it'll help somebody out who's had a similar issue and who's having trouble. So the first issue, let's take a closer look at the stitch width assembly. Let me get it to, hopefully it'll focus here in a second. So the first issue is that you're going to have freezing. Well, you're either going to have one of two things or a combination of both. One issue is that you can move the dial side to side freely to adjust the stitch width, but the problem is you're going to get a slight zigzag when you're in straight stitch, or you set it to 0, but your needle still is zigzagging slightly. And that adjustment is made via this front screw here. Typically it's like a fraction of a degree a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left will realign these cams and get you to, or not the cams, the eccentrics, and get it to go straight. But in order to move this shaft, you have to come up underneath this dial here, and there's the set screw. So you loosen the set screw, and then you can make the adjustment. Well, oftentimes these knobs will freeze on the shaft, and it just becomes totally impossible to make that adjustment. The other issue is that the whole shaft freezes, and I'll show you how to get to that in a second. If you have a combination of both, and the way to test that first would be to loosen this set screw on the bottom, and turn the dot and put a screwdriver in here and turn this side to side. If you're able to rock the dial on the shaft, you know that this is free. If you can't and it's totally frozen, then you know that the knob's frozen. If you can't turn the dial side to side as well, then your whole assembly is totally frozen. So here's how to approach it. For me, to remove the dial from the shaft, I'll use something called penetrating oil. Now you can get a variety of manufacturers make this stuff. So I use liquid wrench penetrating oil. It's what my local hardware store happened to have. But there's other versions out there. Croyle, I've heard, is a really good one. WD-40, I believe, makes something, but you have to get, it's called penetrating oil. Like, make sure that it says that on the can or on the bottle. So for the dial, how I free it up is I'll put a drop on the front. Tilt the machine back, I'll put a drop on the front. On the bottom here, there's a shaft that holds in the set screw, and then there's also a spring being held in by a set screw. I will back the set screw all the way out, take it all the way out. Then what's going to happen most likely is you're also going to get a spring popping out of the bottom. Don't lose that, just keep an eye out for it. I'll tilt the machine upside down or on its back, and I'll put several drops of penetrating oil in through there, and I'll let it sit for several hours to get penetration through the center, and then also through the front. Also, you can access through the back of the dial, so just drop it straight down or from underneath behind it. So that way you're getting it from the front, the back, and also the middle. And it's going to take a long time. You're talking, for me, I'll wait 6 hours. I'll wait 10 hours, maybe reapply. Sometimes it's taking me a couple days to free this stuff up. This stuff does not work immediately. The other thing you can do is take a hot blow dryer. Not too hot, because this is Bakelite, so it's not going to melt like a plastic would. It's more brittle, and it's going to burn more than it's going to melt. So be conscious with this when you use heat. Do not use like a little butane micro torch. It's a bad idea on this for sure. So yeah, so that's how you get the knob to come off. Then once you had some time to really let it sit, you don't want to just try to pull it off. So you're going to back the set screw. Obviously, well, if you've taken the set screw out in the first step, it's already out. So there's nothing holding the dial on the shaft except for the friction from the, basically it's just like a varnish that's accumulated over time. So what you're going to want to do is move, hopefully you can move the dial. I would move the dial to the middle, to the middle of these two sides, and I'll show you why in a second, but you want it to be free right in the center of the assembly. Then you're going to hold it. I'll come up top and I'll really try to get a strong purchase on it, on this dial to keep it from moving. Don't try to rock the dial while holding the shaft. You're not going to be able to get enough leverage to do that. The best way to do it is to hold the dial in place, take a screwdriver, and I use a hollow ground bit because you don't want to use a standard screwdriver. You're not going to be able to really get a good grip. You see how much play I can turn this, and what you end up doing is you'll end up marring the surface of this screw, breaking it off or stripping the area. You want to use a hollow ground bit where you can really get a firm plant in there, so it's really solid. So rather than rocking the dial on the shaft, you want to rock the shaft out, while holding the dial stationary. And you don't want to do it a lot. You just want to turn it side to side just a little bit, a couple degrees really, rotation. So you're just going to rock it back and forth, reapply the oil if it's still really tight, let it penetrate, and eventually you'll be able to rock. Don't try to turn the thing 90 degrees or anything. Just a little bit of rotation is fine. And then what you're going to want to do is, if you're able to break it free, rotate it side to side while pulling the dial out. And eventually you'll be able to pull it, and eventually it'll come off. So there you can see the springs, and you can also see this little set screw, or this little stop screw here. That stop screw rides within that channel. And what that actually does is it prevents you from, it's basically the stop screw that prevents over travel on this knob. So it's what stops you when you turn to the 0 stitch length or straight stitch, and what stops it at your widest stitch length. The reason why I say to move the dial into the middle position when you're going to try to rock this back and forth is you don't want to break your dial. And here's an example of a broken one from a machine I got, where if you turn to the side and you try to crank it really hard with the screwdriver and you're not holding the dial, you're going to have a lot of force being exerted on this little stop screw when it's in its side position, and that's exactly what happened here. So the whole side just broke right off. It's bakelite, so it's brittle. That's why if you can, move it into the center position. So you got to be really mindful of this little stop screw here in this channel, and not to exert a lot of force on it or try to turn it to free it up. You don't want to break that off because you're not going to be able to find a replacement if you do. So that's how you get that off. And you'll see, so once you pull the dial off, behind here there's also two screws. So you have a shorter one on the bottom where the set screw is, and a longer one on the top. Just don't lose those. Then you're going to pull this little dial off here. This is the indicator for your stitch width, and you'll see it kind of bends up. It's flat. You have a knob a little nub in the back here that goes against the plate. This nub here goes against, and it basically is for the buttonhole setting, and then so that's where that goes. Now you can remove, there's two screws that hold this in place. I've already removed one. Let me back it out here. Now behind here, now when the whole dial freezes and you can't turn it side to side, which is another issue, what's basically happening is this shaft is frozen in here. This is like just a guide that holds the shaft in place. Well, this will totally freeze inside. So the way to get to that is I just flood the whole area with kerosene, and I'll let it penetrate and break down as much as I can, and then I'll blow it out with compressed air. And then I'll go to the penetrating oil. If you don't have access to that, that's fine. You can just flood the front with penetrating oil and flood the back with penetrating oil. And then don't try to break it free by using the knob. Always use the screwdriver here to turn it. and just a little bit. If you're able to get the knob off and you can get here, you can also get in there with heat. So I'll put penetrating oil in here. I'll heat the whole area up first with a micro torch, and then I'll put penetrating oil, and that helps free up and break down that oil that's frozen in there that's created that varnish. And you can hit it from the front and the back side. You can also take a blow dryer from the back of the machine and blow hot air into this area to help free it up. But yeah, this stuff basically varnishes over and it freezes it. It becomes like a glue. I've heard rumors that these machines were shipped with a combination of gasoline and Vaseline mixture to prevent corrosion while in transit, while they're being imported from Germany. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but these machines freeze more than any other I've worked on, and I've worked on a lot. Part of that is really tight tolerances, but part of that too, I think, has to do with whatever they were using in the internals, because it just turns into a glue. So those are the two ways to get it out, to loosen it up, and then just to reassemble. It's pretty straightforward. You just have the two screws for the faceplate on this. You just put those in. But yeah, you go through reinstall and then follow the adjustments in the manual to get the stitch width and everything else. And if you have to go into the cams, that's all outlined in the manual. But I thought I would just show my method for freeing up these, either a stuck dial or a stuck shaft. So those are the two things that freeze up. Hopefully you have some luck on your machine and you're able to get it back working. So good luck.